My great aunt's obsession with garden gnomes was a bit of a running joke in our family. We would tease her about them at family gatherings, joking that they were taking over her property. She had more than a dozen of them, scattered all over her back and front yard, as well as in the garden. So, when she asked me if I could drive her to the flea market one Saturday, I already knew what she was aiming to buy. "Looking for another jewel for your front yard?" I asked, smiling. In my family, we were always ribbing each other. "Of course. There's a perfect spot by the front door now, since we removed that shrub last week. I need to get a special little guy to go there. They better have something interesting." When we arrived at the flea market, I saw they did indeed have something interesting. It was in the front window of the shop, staring at us when we parked, and my great aunt lit up with a big smile. I couldn't understand her reaction, since my first thought was that the thing looked malicious and cruel. "There it is, that's the one," she exclaimed. So much for shopping around. She jumped out of the car while it was still rolling, dashing inside quickly on her arthritic little legs. I hurriedly finished parking the car and chased after her, stealing a backwards glance at the creepy little gnome. It was dressed in green and purple and had an evil grin on its small, bearded face. It was holding an axe, which glinted like a real blade in the sunlight. "Excellent craftsmanship," the flea market owner was already saying when I got inside. He was walking back to the counter, holding the thing carefully in his hands, and I shuddered. The idea of touching it revolted me for some reason. He set it down gently on the counter, and my great aunt began to fawn over it, preening its beard and running her finger down the long blade of the axe. "Careful!" I shouted, a little louder than I had intended. They both paused and looked at me with their eyebrows raised. "It's not a real axe blade, Jason. Don't be silly," my great aunt said, rolling her eyes and turning her attention back to the man behind the counter. I saw she was right. The blade had looked real in the window, but that had just been a trick of the light, I surmised. "How much?" she asked, opening her purse. "This is a Von Welken original," the man said. "They don't come cheap. He did all the detail work and painting himself, by hand. This was one of the last pieces he did before starting to pump them out like crazy last year. All that fine handiwork he was known for, out the window. I hate to say it, but it's almost a blessing he passed away last month. This one went up for auction at his estate sale, actually. But this man sure seemed to know a lot about gnomes, I thought. But my great aunt was nodding along as if she knew this all already. "Of course. It was so sad what happened to him. Oh, I've always wanted one of his pieces. Not the newer ones, of course, but one of these old ones with all the detail. It's stunning." I had to admit, she was right. The gnome looked real. The fact that it was carved out of wood and painted by hand only made it more amazing. The features on the face were lifelike, as was the rest of it. The clothing appeared hand-sewn and had little scuffs and rips in it. But of course, it was all just a masterfully painted block of wood. The beard and hat had texture and definition to them, with just the right look of weight and feel. As someone who had dabbled in art and was a student of it all my life, I couldn't help but being impressed by the sculptor's work. The man quoted a price so high, I actually laughed out loud. My aunt turned around and shot daggers at me. She didn't even haggle, just began pulling crisp 50s and 100s out of her wallet and stacking them neatly on the counter. I couldn't believe my eyes. The revolting little thing was worth a small fortune. I tried to talk her out of it quietly, but it was hopeless. She was angry that I would even suggest she pass on such an opportunity. This was an investment, she said. We got back to her house, and she set the gnome down with great care in the spot she had planned for it. It rested evenly on the stump left over from the removed shrub, looking very gnome-like on its naturalistic platform. She admired it for a moment, then shot me another dirty look and walked inside, slamming the door behind her. I stood there examining the hideous little gnome. The axe blade seemed to glint again in the sunlight, as if it had changed magically into real metal again. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw the little bastard wink at me. I shook my head and rubbed my eyes disbelievingly. There was no way that had just happened, I thought. I was just working too many night shifts. I spent a bit more time that day and managed to obtain my great aunt's forgiveness for my transgressions. She showed me mercy and provided me with popsicles and cool lemonade, grateful for my assistance on such a hot day. I did have to apologize for embarrassing her at the flea market, even though I was still disturbed by the gnome. I did some research when I got home, and found a bit of information online about the suspicious death of Mr. Von Welken. It turned out he had gone somewhat mad in the weeks and months before his death, and he had claimed that it wasn't him making the myriad of gnomes in his workshop. The police had found quite an odd scene when they arrived at his suicide. I read on, fascinated. My great aunt called me the next morning, hysterical. She wouldn't say what had happened on the phone, only that I needed to get over there right away. She said she was calling the police when she finished talking to me, and hung up. I hurried over and arrived to find her pacing in the driveway. The police hadn't arrived yet, and I quickly found out why they weren't in a hurry. "Someone destroyed my babies," she was wailing as I pulled up in my car. She was still in her bathrobe, and complaining that the police hadn't arrived yet. Didn't they realize this was an emergency? I surveyed the damage. All the gnomes throughout the front yard and in the garden had been smashed to pieces. Actually, I realized, they looked like they had been hacked to pieces by the blade of a very small axe. The backyard was the same. All of her gnomes had been destroyed, and small piles of wood scraps were left where they had stood the night before. All of the gnomes were obliterated. The one by the front door, though, was still there. Its tiny face smiled up at me, eyes full of mischief. The axe blade looked like it had little splinters of wood all over it. But that wasn't possible. I dismissed such a notion as pure insanity. Those were the kind of thoughts that got you locked up in padded rooms, I mused to myself. But it sure did look like little bits of wood on the blade of the axe. Little splinters, from chopping up a bunch of other rival gnomes, perhaps? No. Those were not the thoughts of a sane person. I consoled my great aunt as she began to cry. I hugged her and she wept against my shoulder. "At least I still have Mr. Winkles," she sobbed. Oh no, I thought. She's named the bastard. Mr. Winkles. What a name. I thought about his sly wink at me and shuddered. She went over to her one remaining gnome and picked it up, rocking it and smoothing down its wooden beard hair as if it had hairs askew. It was unsettling to watch. I saw the neighbor's cat was trying to get into the house, and I went up to the porch to give it a few pats on the head. My great aunt saw it too and set the gnome down quickly, hurrying after me. She loved the neighbor's cat, Lucy. It was practically hers, since she fed it every morning and evening, and it spent most days inside her house or roaming her backyard. That chubby old cat acted like it owned the place. "Good morning, Lucy Lou," she sang to the cat. "Did you see what they did to Mommy's babies? Did you?" She scratched the cat under its chin and behind its ears, while it purred happily. The cat rubbed its body against her robe, leaving mounds of shedding black fur behind. A police officer eventually showed up, looking bored and resigned to his duty. He took a lengthy statement from my great aunt and told us that this sort of thing happened a lot. Kids love smashing garden gnomes. It was what they did. I looked at Mr. Winkles and wished kids these days could be a bit more thorough in their vandalism. A week later, I was back at my great aunt's house and was surprised to see she had several new gnomes scattered across her front yard and in the garden. They didn't look quite as nice as the old ones, and I wondered where she had gotten them from. They looked cheap and poorly made. The paint on these looked splotchy, and the details looked like they'd been done by a child. The edges were smudged and uneven. The patterns and color choices clashed, and hurt my eyes if I looked too long. I asked her about them, and she said they had just appeared there. A new 1 or 2 each morning for the past week. This morning, there were actually 5 new ones, she said, with a faraway look in her eyes. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well. I asked if she was okay, and she nodded her head without looking at me, then blinked for a few seconds longer than normal. I asked her if she wanted to go lie down, and she said that was a good idea. We decided we would go out shopping the next week, since it wasn't urgent. She had just wanted to get a few gifts for Christmas. Since it was June, there wasn't a big hurry, at least in my mind. The next week, I came back and found her passed out on the couch in the living room. She was so tired I could barely wake her up, and almost considered calling an ambulance, until she bounced up, looking lively again. She said she had just been napping and was looking forward to our shopping trip. I asked her about the new ranks of gnomes, which had begun to make walking to her front door difficult, but she just laughed, saying that friends had brought them for her. When I asked which friends, she wouldn't say. Mr. Winkles was waiting for us when we pulled up to the house after shopping. I trudged past him, glaring at him out of the corner of my eye as I carried bags into the house. There was something off about all of this, I thought to myself. There was something very wrong going on here. The new gnomes were even more disgusting than the last batch. They were hideous, deformed-looking creatures. They were missing arms and legs, and their faces were twisted and distorted. The features were disproportioned and askew. I felt a sharp pain in my ankle and cried out. I looked down to see my ankle bleeding from a wound. A flap of skin was hanging down unnaturally, and blood was trickling down into my sock. I looked over at Mr. Winkles and saw a fresh rivulet of crimson blood running down his axe blade. But when I looked closer, there was nothing. I complained to my great aunt, but she said I had likely caught my leg on the railing, and just blamed me for not repainting it like I had promised to months ago. I went inside and cleaned the nasty wound, replacing the flap of skin and putting a bandage over it to hold it in place. For a long time, it wouldn't stop bleeding. The cut was pretty deep. It took several of the bandages to do the job of covering it, and I could still see blood beginning to seep through the cracks and around the edges. I went home and decided to continue my research into the eccentric Dutchman who had crafted Mr. Winkles. I had gone down a conspiracy theory rabbit hole, and did not like what I was finding. A few days later, I went back to my great aunt's house. I went by late in the evening, just before she usually went to bed, and without calling to tell her I was coming. I was starting to worry about her, and I had a few bizarre suspicions after my extensive research. I needed to see what was happening there, if only to preserve my own sanity. When I arrived at the house, I parked in the driveway and got out of my car. I heard a low-pitched noise from the backyard and went to investigate. When I got into the backyard, I stopped dead. It was changed completely from the last time I had seen it. The privacy hedges were blocking the public from seeing an oddly terrifying spectacle. Trees had been cut down and chopped into tiny piles of wood. The back deck had been dismantled, its wood similarly refined and arranged into neat stacks. The most obvious change was that there was now a horde of hideously deformed lawn gnomes huddled together in the backyard. I heard the low-pitched sound again and looked to see the cat from next door, Lucy, was being dragged away from the fence, her claws digging into the grass as she tried to save herself. She was being pulled into their midst by about a dozen lawn gnomes, who had tied her with ropes and were pulling her mercilessly towards the center of the fray, where a crowd of other gnomes sharpened their glinting knives. The cat was hissing and swatting at the gnomes with her claws. Mr. Winkles presided over the mayhem, sitting on a misshapen throne carved of driftwood at the back of the lawn. Some gnomes were working at the back of the garden behind him, chopping down another tree and cutting it up into usable pieces. A fire had been constructed, and more were huddled around it, roasting what appeared to be mice and squirrels on sticks. I shouted at them to stop, running into the midst of them, kicking them this way and that, and sending their tiny bodies flying. I pulled the ropes off the cat and freed her, as they hacked at my legs with their tiny knives. I shouted triumphantly when I had finally pulled the last of the ropes off of her and picked her up in my arms. She kicked with her back legs and dug her sharp claws into my arms, jumping free from me and bounding away quickly. I yelped in pain, clutching my now bleeding arms, as the gnomes continued hacking at my legs with their sharp little weapons. Then I felt a terrible pain in the back of my head, and the world went black. I woke up in a low-ceilinged cave, with dirt walls pressed close to my face and cold earth beneath me. I couldn't stand up, couldn't even kneel down where I was. Claustrophobia gripped me, and I felt my chest tighten with fear as I looked around and saw I had less than 2 feet of room between the floor and the ceiling. I started to hyperventilate as I tried to turn around, but found I couldn't. I couldn't even get my hands in front of me. I realized I was bound and tied up like a sow, with my wrists tied to my ankles. I was being dragged backwards, away from the light. I struggled against the knots and felt them giving way slightly. My only hope was that these things were so defectively inbred it had begun to affect their intelligence. I pulled with all my strength and felt the ropes give way. I looked behind me and saw the gnomes had fallen backwards, surprised that their tiny string bindings had snapped. Their wooden faces crunched as I kicked them hard, and smashed them with my shoes against the dirt walls of the cave. I crawled forward, dirt flying into my eyes and in my mouth. The gnomes scrambled after me, and attacked my legs with sharp knives. I screamed and flailed at them, batting them away as I made my way on my belly towards the light. Progress was slow, but fear of what was behind me drove me forward, and I managed to ignore the pain of their attacks. I finally clawed grass and pulled myself out onto the back lawn. The cool night air was fresh against my face. I scrambled to my feet and ran over to Mr. Winkles, where he sat upon his driftwood throne. He stood up on the chair and pulled out his axe, swinging it menacingly. I grabbed a flaming log from the fire. It burned my hands and I screamed, but held it nonetheless. I flung it with all the force I could muster, hitting Mr. Winkles square in the chest. The flame spread impossibly fast, and he lit up like flash paper. He began to scream and wail, his varnished flesh melting. The other gnomes ran over and threw sand and dirt on him, extinguishing the flames. I turned around to see my great aunt standing silently behind me. She slid the blade of a very large knife into my belly. That pain was like nothing I'd ever felt before. She twisted the knife and it flared up 10 times worse. I thought I was gonna die. There was no way anyone could live through that pain. "I told you, no one hurts my babies," she whispered in my ear as I collapsed to the ground, the knife still lodged in my gut. Von Welken had gone insane, the story said. But there were other stories online too, if you look deeper. If you probe the dark web for conspiracy theories, you could find more than a few people who said there was more going on in that case. The suicide note, for instance. It had started off in Von Welken's handwriting, but then had veered into childish block letters. In his writing, Von Welken said he hadn't made the new gnomes. He said that the winking one had made them, and his children had borne even more hideous and deformed children. The block letters disagreed, saying Von Welken had made the gnomes, right before he lost his mind. The police had determined the scene unusual, but it was ruled a suicide nonetheless. I wish they had done a bit more digging. Maybe they wouldn't have put up his gnomes for auction if they had realized what they really were. Then maybe I wouldn't be here, in this tiny dirt cave. I'm trapped here with nothing but the light from my dying phone to keep me company. I've tried calling the police. They say to stop calling, that the prank isn't funny. They say they've been to my great aunt's house and seen her. She says there's nothing wrong, and that she doesn't even have a great nephew. The police operator says there's no sign of a tunnel at the back of the house. Gnomes are such excellent craftsmen. Hey everybody, hope you enjoyed today's first of 2 stories. I want to take a quick second to remind you to like, comment, and subscribe on this video. It really helps the channel grow and reach more new people. I was checking recently and saw that around half the people who watch the channel aren't yet subscribed, so I hope you'll take a quick second to hit that button if you haven't yet. Alright, now on to our next story. This is probably going to come as a shock to most of you, but here goes. Count Chocula is a real person. Actually, a real vampire, if you want to get specific about it. We met in the 70s. I was his advertising campaign manager. Unlike most vampires who stayed in Transylvania due to monarchistic duties, he chose to reside in Belgium, where better chocolate could be found. Although he visited France and Germany frequently as well. He was a connoisseur of the stuff. Chocolate, that is. But he also enjoyed a glass of blood with dinner and a nightcap at bedtime. For the antioxidants, he told me once. It was on one of those frequent trips to France that he met a representative from a cereal company looking for a new mascot. General Mills. There's nothing quite like working with a vampire, and Count Chocula was no exception. I met him at the General Mills head office, where the head marketing manager was holding a meeting. I came in as an outside consultant, but I was soon hired on full-time. Mr. James, I want you to meet our newest asset. This is Count Chocula IV, Mr. Scottson said, gesturing to a man in brown and purple robes. It was the 70s, so, of course, he had massive sideburns, and what would be considered today to be a ridiculous updo, split right down the middle like Shemp, and then drawn upwards into spikes, which looked like brown horns made of hair. I shook hands with the tall, strange-looking man. He had 2 very large, sharpened buck teeth, which gleamed white in the bright light of the conference room. "I love what you did with the Frosted Cornflakes campaign," said the Count. "That tiger gets me every time. Ha ha ha." His belly laugh sounded very vampiric. But other than that, he looked like your friendly, run-of-the-mill mascot. Not the cartoon, of course. That creation was simply styled after his look. "So here's what we're thinking, James," Mr. Scottson said, pointing to a presentation board. "Count Chocula cereal. They're chock full of cinnamon." He looked excited and paused for my response. Count Chocula waited with a big smile on his face for my approval. "Nobody's doing cinnamon. Nobody. We'd be the first ones with a cinnamon-based cereal. Big clumps of it that are crunchy at first, but they dissolve in the milk and get deliciously soggy. What do you think, Mr. James? Is that a winner or what?" I tried not to burst the man's bubble too brutally, but the idea stank. It was right there in front of them. How could they not see it? "Tell him the catchphrase," someone said from across the table, sensing my reticence. "I want to cinnamon your blood," the Count said enthusiastically. Everyone grinned wide and looked at me with expectant eyes. Did you guys ever consider Count Chocula being made with chocolate? Everyone's jaws dropped. Spontaneous applause broke out, and I was lifted up on several people's shoulders as they sang songs of my great idea, carrying me on a chair around the office, being careful not to be too specific in the lyrics of their impromptu celebratory songs, since spies from Kellogg's could be anywhere. There were suspected moles in the office. "Brilliant idea, Mr. James," said Count Chocula afterwards, clapping me on the back. "I want this man in charge of all the advertising for my brand. He's my guy, Scottson. Understand?" The old manager grudgingly agreed. I didn't come cheap after all, and the 3 of us shook on the deal. It was the beginning of a strange partnership and an even stranger friendship. The start of the 70s was upon us, and we began things off with a bang. Regulations were loose back then, and it showed in the ingredients. Or, rather, it didn't show. Frankenberry's running with the law for using a banned indigestible pigment, resulting in Frankenberry stool, pink-colored poop for the layperson, wouldn't happen for a few more years, and we were all living the good life, riding high on a wave of profits. The FDA had bigger fish to fry, at least for the time being. As sales of our sugar and cocoa-laden cereal began to skyrocket, I was touted as a king of the cereal advertising industry. Our chocolate cereal idea was the envy of every other brand. The Count was happy to stay hidden in the shadows and collect his cash, people believing he was just what we claimed he was, a lovable cartoon mascot. Nobody knew the darkest truths yet. Not even me. We were doing great at the beginning, with wealth and power that few people could dream of. I used to keep boxes of cash in my closets, in my cupboards, all over my house. I didn't trust the banks. I still don't. Not after what they did to George Young. We had women, cars, yachts, you name it. We'd hit a chocolate gold mine. Kids weren't used to that level of sugar in their cereals back in those days. In order to get even close to the taste they wanted, kids had to heap it on themselves by the tablespoon. And parents didn't like to look at that. Not one bit. Not with the price of sugar as high as it was. But what they didn't see didn't hurt them. A market was out there sitting wide open for a cheap, sweet, somewhat digestible breakfast cereal. So we pumped those toasted oats full of sugar, fat, dye, and cocoa powder, and set them loose on society. With all that money came power and freedoms we never could have imagined. All of us pretended not to know what the Count did with his share of the cash. But sooner or later, we all knew. We all found out one by one, in our own ways. I discovered the truth when he invited me to his castle in Belgium one summer. It was 73, I think, and we were riding high still, with nothing but hope and big plans for the future on the horizon. But I didn't realize the Count had different aspirations, darker and much grander plans than simply cereal production. His castle was located on a mountainous pass, and was very difficult to reach. I rented a car, and it barely made it up the steep slopes. Everyone in town seemed terrified when I told them where I was headed, and said to be careful. They said there were rumors of a great monster that lived in the mountains, a huge, winged beast. A storm was brewing when I arrived, a black cloud coming in over the mountains to my right, as I pulled up to the giant castle. I hurried quickly up the front steps, feeling as if there were eyes upon me, watching me from above. There was a large brass knocker on the huge wooden doors at the front of the house, wrought iron and shaped in the face of a sharp-toothed bat. I used it to knock, and the door swung open by itself. "Count?" I called out, walking into the dusty castle foyer. There seemed to be nobody home, and yet I still couldn't help but feel as if I was being watched.
"Ah, Mr. James. A pleasure to see you here."
The Count was suddenly behind me, although I hadn't seen him on the stairs outside. All I'd heard was a flap and a flutter behind me, like a giant pair of wings. "Oh, you surprised me. Good to see you, Count. How have you been?"
"Excellent. I finally gotten everything I've ever wanted. All thanks to you."
He closed the door behind him, and I realized I was cornered. His face no longer looked friendly. In fact, he looked quite upset. "Is everything okay, Count? You don't look like yourself." He dropped his cape to the stone floor and unfurled a set of massive bat wings. They were ragged and torn, sewn together with scraps of flesh. I saw the remnants of human bodies sewn together with crude stitches. Faces mid-scream. There were nipples and stretch lines and all the imperfections of the random, unfortunate souls who he had chosen to piece together to make his masterpieces. His fully functional bat wings. Holy shit, Count. Some people buy a private jet. I guess you took it a step further. How much did you pay for those things? I saw blood was dripping down his chin and onto his brown suit. He didn't answer me. Oh no. Have you been blood binging again? You know how you get when you're like that? All grabby and bitey. I don't like it when you're like this. Can I go? His eyes blazed red with sudden fire.
You are the one spying for Kellogg's. I got the call this morning from our man over there. He said it's you for sure. You are the man on the inside.
My heart began to pound with fear as he stepped toward me. His massive wings blocked out the light, and he looked tall and menacing, his sharp buck teeth dripping freshly consumed blood. Me? Never!
You lie. They said you've been feeding them secrets all year.
They're just trying to drive a wedge between us. I'm the one who came up with the idea of putting the chocolate in Count Chocula, remember? If it wasn't for me, you'd be nothing. Cinnamon clumps that get soggy. That was your idea. Nobody wants to eat that. Nobody wants to eat cinnamon cereal. I realized I was making things worse, and I quickly shut up. His gaze darkened, and he lunged at me like a wild animal, his wings drawn back as he closed the distance between us in an instant. He grabbed me by the neck and began to choke me, squeezing my trachea between his fingers with so much force I was barely able to speak for weeks afterwards. It wasn't me, I managed to squeak. You can't kill me. I made you what you are. My hands were in his face, trying to push him away, and he suddenly recoiled, dropping me.
Ah, what is on your hands? They taste terrible.
Oh, there was pasta on the plane. Garlic bread, too. Lots of garlic. In all of it. I exhaled a stink bomb of garlic breath in his face, and he backed away even further. I'd also stuck 2 of the garlic breadsticks in my pocket, and I took them out and made an impromptu cross with them.
Why? Don't do this to me, Mr. James. We're partners.
Not anymore, I said, tossing one of the cold breadsticks at his forehead and burning him badly with it. He crumpled to the floor, and I raced past him and unlocked the door, leaving as fast as I could. I got back to my car and drove out of there as quickly as possible. A shadow seemed to follow me as I raced down the steep mountain roads, blocking out the light of the moon. A huge bird, it looked like, but I knew it was something much worse. Without a single stop along the way, I made it to the airport and left my rental car just outside the front entrance of the hangar, not caring if it got towed. I got on the phone with General Mills as soon as I was back stateside. I'll never work with that blood-sucking son of a bitch again, I told him. I'll keep my agreed-upon percentages and stay as a silent partner from now on. You guys are on your own with that lunatic. We're sorry to lose you, said the general. But he didn't argue. My mind was made up. He relieved me of my duties, and I went on to other jobs and other opportunities. 10 years later, a new CEO was in charge, and I pitched him an idea that he absolutely loved. Cinnamon Toast Crunch. You're welcome. Hey everybody. The 2 stories you just heard were written by me, and were 2 of the very first horror/comedy stories I ever wrote. In today's episode of the Group Project on my second channel, I talked about my writing with author Gtrip14. If you're interested in hearing more about my work and about Hollow's End, I hope you'll join me after this video for a fireside chat. Check out the description below, or type @ the Group Project into your search bar. That's GRUPE Group. Thanks everybody, and have a great night. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Grupe Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.